Welcome to our very first sew along. Today we're going to be making these really cute little pattern weights, little pyramids. They're filled with rice or dried beans or other materials that give it a little heft, but they're easy to fill. So first I want to go over a couple of tools that you're going to need for today. Hopefully you looked at the little tutorial that we're following, but if you are still looking, what you're going to need is some paper for making the paper pattern that we're going to do today, a ruler so that we can draw our nice triangles, a rotary cutter to cut out the fabric. This is the easiest way. You can also use fabric scissors. They're such small little pattern pieces that it's easy to zip around with one of these. If you are really interested in getting crisp corners, I don't care about it, but you can see they're little rounded. But if you want crisp corners, you're going to want a point press. So that's this little thing here. And you can press those corners out really sharp if you are interested in doing that. You're going to need some pens. Of course, you're going to need some fabric, paper scissors, I believe I mentioned, to cut your pattern out. You'll need some hand sewing needles and some thread to finish them off. And then of course you'll need some sort of stuffing. I just use rice, and a funnel definitely helps fill. You'll also of course need a sewing machine. You can hand sew these completely together. It just might take you a little bit more time. But this is what we're going to use today. And the first thing we're going to do is make the pattern. So you'll need your ruler, your pens, and your paper. I'll just clear a few things out of my way. All right. So I use this pattern tracing paper. It's nice and sturdy. You can crumple it up and then iron it flat. Regular paper is perfectly fine. This likes to lay kind of like fabric and can kind of be smooth a little bit easier than paper, but it doesn't matter. So the ones I've got and the ones from the tutorial are 7-inch triangles. And so 7 inches is what the measurement we're going to be using the whole time. So we'll start by drawing the bottom of the triangle, and we'll just go and draw 7 inches. And we'll also make sure to mark the center, so 3.5. And then squared off at that center mark, you're going to go ahead and draw a line perpendicular. Make it really long for now, because what we want to do is then make each of the sides of the triangle 7 inches as well, but that's not necessarily 7 inches up this line, because math. So I put the 7-inch right there on my mark there, and then I rotate my ruler until I hit that center line, and I can draw that in. And theoretically, this line should hit at the same point. If you want to check, you can do the same thing on this side, and it hits, so we're doing great. And now you have 7 inches on all sides, nice and equal, very simple. You can change the size of this to get different size pattern weights, and I have done that. I have some little 6-inchers, and so you can see the size difference. Let's just look at it one-on-one. So you can see 6 inches kind of makes it just a little bit smaller. And then I have actually, and I don't know if this is useful yet, but I haven't filled it, so we'll see how that goes. But I did a little 5-incher for those really tight spots on your pattern. Same theory, choose your size, your scale, draw your first line, make a center line, and then make sure the sides are the same as that first line, wherever they hit on that center line. Easy peasy. All right, so then we're just going to cut our pattern out. Now, I don't draw a grain line on these because for me, it's more about busting that stash of scraps. Additionally, which side is up, which side is down, these things are going to be, you know, tossed on your pattern in different orientations. I don't find that it makes any sort of a difference to really line up a grain line. If you want, you kind of have one here, but you'll see when we start sewing it together and folding it, it's really hard to keep track of which way the grain line is. And once again, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. So we'll just cut our little pattern out. Voila, here we are. So next thing, we're going to grab our fabric. So whatever fabric you have is probably fine as long as it doesn't have too much stretch. This is a pretty stable cotton. You can use quilters cotton like these guys or these guys. You can use some yarn dyed, nicer fabric if you have some lying around. As long as it's not too stretchy. Otherwise, you're just going to fill it and it's not going to be a nice little pyramid. It needs a little bit of structure. You'll kind of just end up with a bulgy thing, which could be fun. I haven't tried it with stretchy fabrics, but I find I like this. Now, this one has a tassel, and so we'll have to keep that in mind. If you want a tassel for quick grabbing or hanging up in your studio, you can just use some bias tape, some purchase stuff, whatever size suits you. You can use some soutache if you've got that lying around, some ribbon, some threads. You can make tassels like the little demo the tutorial says. You can even make your own bias binding, which is what I did here. So it's made out of the same fabric, so it matches. And I just use my bias binding tool. There is a video on PFI TV's YouTube page on how to make your own bias, how to use this tool, how to cut it, sew it, and get it looking perfect. And then you can make these cute little bias binding loops if you like. I've just sewn it down the center after I made the bias binding double fold. So check out the YouTube page if you want to do that and have matching tassels. Otherwise, you can use whatever you like, but there's no pattern piece for it. It's just a loop of something. So when placing your pattern, I do it kind of messy because this is, you know, scraps. I'm not going to sit around and iron everything and make it perfect. And then you can place it around. It helps to have multiples of this pattern piece to help really see where it's going. Or you can use a pen to trace it out. So if you put it somewhere and trace it out, then you can move this and trace the next one and get an idea. But if you have, you know, some already cut out, you can, or multiple pattern pieces, you can kind of start to lay them out and see how to optimize your fabric. So that looks nice. It looks like I can get a nice row of a couple of them going this way. So that's what I think I'll do. And I'll just go ahead and trace them out since now we know that. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that down on my fabric. And you can trace it. You can use pattern weights and your rotary cutter. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut one out for now, just so that we can get through this pretty quickly. You can cut out a whole bunch, cut out a big stack of them, and then we'll go through the next steps. So I'll just cut this guy out. And I just a little spot. This is fine. Okay. So there we go. Now this doesn't appear to have a right and a wrong side. So for the rest of this demonstration, I'll switch to a different piece. I didn't think that through. All right, so this one clearly has a good side and a bad side, or not bad side, but you know, printed and unprinted. So we want our good side, and we're going to start sewing this together. So we're going to take our good side and we're going to fold it in half so that that unprinted side is facing us. The good side is on the inside there. So this is right sides together, fold along one leg of that triangle. And we are going to sew down that short leg at 1/4 inch. Don't want a lot of seam allowance in these things, so just 1/4 inch will do you. You're going to want to go from the fold to the corner, the raw edge corner. I'm just going to pop this in here. Hopefully you have your machine threaded with matching color, but it's not that important. Once again, they're just little pattern weights. They make good gifts, so you might want to make it look nice for someone else. But if you're just starting out, getting your pattern weight situation started, whatever you have on hand is good. Oh, I really thought you could see that. I'm sewing al fresco today, so my door is open there and the sun is just blowing everything out. So this is the point at which you can press the little seam allowances open if you really want a crisp edge. You can also just do a finger press, which is what I like to do. If you have a little bit of nails, you can just kind of stick your finger nail from the inside, one from the outside, and just kind of scrape along the sewing line there, along the stitching. Press that out, press that out. The corner is going to be tough because it does have that fold. You can clip that, but if you really want crisp corners. Otherwise, I'd leave it. It's such a short seam allowance. You don't want your little corners unraveling. So just kind of press them open a little bit as best you can. And there you go. So that's part one. Should look like so. Next, you're going to take this corner of the long unsewn side, and you're going to fold it up into the corner that you just sewed. So what that looks like is taking it like so and just folding that up. Try and match the corner points at the top, so there is a bit of overlap because of that seam allowance. So if you can see, I've got it all the way up to the tippy top there, and folding it down, we're going to sew one length of this the whole way from the fold to the point. When you get to the point, you can either press all the seam allowances from the previous over and lay flat against your new folded piece. You could also try and split them and just sew to the very center of the seam line. Either way, this is going to be the bunchiest corner. And you can clip this later, like clip off all the little extra seam allowances here. But this corner is usually going to be the most rounded of them all. Not a big deal. And at this point, this is your first chance to put in a tassel. And if you're doing that, say you have your little tassel here, you're going to want to put the folded part inside. So fold your little tassel. It's falling apart. Okay. So you'll fold your little tassel in half, so you have your loop, and you're going to stick that loop inside anywhere along that, but you probably want it at the corner, so at that fold, you'll have the loop in the fold. Line up the edges of your loop. You can have a little extra coming out. That's not a big deal, but you'll put those little tassel bits there. Line up your start and end points, and you can sew that tassel in from the fold to the edge. If you're doing a tassel, you can put it in this one, you can put it in the next one. Doesn't matter. You have two choices here, two chances. If you're doing tassels and you get past this one, you go, oops, I forgot the tassel, you still have another chance. You can also hand sew one in at the end, but that's just extra work. And we like to let the machine do that. All right, so I'm all lined up. One part. Here we go. 1/4 inch. And I'm not using pins because it's such a short little seam here. And it's a straight line. So there's nothing keeping the fabric from like moving. It should just sit there and give you a nice little straight line. Once you get that fold, get your needle in there, make sure you're lined up, pinch and hold, and use our patented technique, the professional technique of just holding the pieces together and sewing. So no pins necessary. All right, so now your next step, you should have 2 seams sewn and then 1 completely unsewn. Starting to look a little bit like a pyramid, kind of, like a deflated one. And for this last one, you want to start at, not at the fold, start where your other seams align, and you want to put the needle in just where they meet. So you don't want to sew over all these seam allowances. That gets them all, makes it harder to trim them later. You don't need to, just make sure you hit that point good and back tack when you're sewing. And sew halfway, maybe a little more, but not too much more than halfway. What you want is a nice hole. You want a nice little hole when you turn it right side out, so you can get your funnel in there, so you can fill it up with your rice. And so you want the machine to do a little bit more work. You could sew this whole side up by hand, but get it halfway. You can still get the stuff in there and fill it. And then you only have a little bit of hand sewing to do. So we're going to do that last bit from this little corner here where it's all little loose edges towards the fold, halfway at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And make sure you start right at that where all that other seams meet, just to keep it from getting too glompy, and then do a little back tack, keep it secure. And at the halfway point, once you're there, do a back tack there. You don't want it unraveling while you're trying to hand stitch or stuff. And there you go. At this point, you should have a little pyramid. Ta-da! So now we're going to turn it right side out. And at this point, your last chance to press any of the seam allowances on your point turner. Might be a little difficult to get all of them at this point, but you can also always just stick a finger inside and then take a nail on the top and just kind of push them open. It'll help crispen it. Whoop. But like I said, they tend to bulge, so they're not going to look perfect. At least they're not at first. Maybe you'll find a technique. Make sure to share that with us. So you can just take one of the corners and push it through, right sides out now. And then just keep opening it up. You can use a point turner if you can get it into the hole to really get those corners out. You can do a little bit of a rolling, a little pinch and roll to help get the corners nice and tight. This one actually came out pretty good. Look at that, little sharp little corners. Oh, I did mention we could trim that one corner. If you did want to do that, you can still pop it out just a little bit. And you can cut off some of the extra fuzzy tassels, just kind of the tips of them all should do ya. Will help a little bit. And let's see how that looks. All right, that's pretty nice. Got myself a nice little corner there. So just keep fluffing it out until you have your little pyramid. At this point, what I like to do is I like to turn the seam allowances on this guy, kind of just tuck them back in and pull it tight. So you can look at it from the seam that we sewed halfway, kind of fold it on the seam line there. And then you can see that these seam allowance should line up and you should get a nice straight line to the corner. So if you can kind of tuck them in and turn them, press them if you like. Gives you a nice line when you're hand stitching. So these ones I did with the iron. I just folded it up like that, then hit it with the iron just on the tip here. And it gave me a nice little crisp press there so that I know exactly where my seam line should be when I hand stitch it. But you don't have to do that. You can also just kind of crease it with your fingers again, your nails. Just kind of go over it like that. So if you don't want to get an iron involved, you don't have to. But it's just to help get an idea and keep your seam here looking nice and straight and even. So we are pretty much sewn. So now all there's left to do is to fill it. I recommend putting it down on a surface when you fill it because it tends to get heavy and then it'll slip out of your hand and then you'll have a big mess. So I have two funnels. This one's got a tighter nozzle, but I'm going to try this one because I think I can get the rice in there better. So put it around and then hold it here, pinch right there, and you can pour in your filler. Make sure it's resting on a surface. Ooh, a little fast. You might have to shake it around and move those grains of rice, squish it a little, move them around, and fill them as much as you like. You can fill them with a little bit of weight, especially if you do a large one. You can fill it with a little bit of weight and put some fluff in at the top to keep it looking nice, but then not have to worry about the rice being filled all the way at the top, using too much of it, or being like crazy heavy if you did like a 10-incher. Wow. But at this size, you can fill them all the way. That's probably too much rice. Let's see what I can get in there. Your fabric will stretch out a little bit over time too, so don't go too light on it, but get a good amount. I did it. All right. So I got a good fill on there. He's quite plump. The rice isn't coming out the top, but it's right there. It's right there, filled to the top, to my little folds. So I can still sew this together by hand without the rice getting in the way, but he's nice and filled. So let's get our hand sewing needle. And there you go. So you can put a knot in the end, or you could do it the couture way. I'll give you a little preview into our couture techniques class. You can make the knot in the fabric as you're sewing. Keeps it cleaner, it's very secure, and it's very fancy. So at your last stitch here, where the machine, you ended on your machine and then you back tacked from there, go ahead and just take a tiny bite. And it's going to be very hard for you to see that, but it's like 2 or 3 threads. And you're going to pull the thread through, but not all the way through. So my thread is here. I've got just a tiny bite right where that other thread is from where I sewed it. Then I'm going to do the same exact bite again. The same exact spot, same exact threads, same in and out point for my needle. And I'm going to start to pull the thread through, but I'm going to stop while I still have a loop. So I still have a loop here. And I didn't pull out the tail from the first stitch. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through that loop twice. And then I'm going to pull it. And that puts a tiny little knot in the fabric there. Very secure, a little bit less noticeable than a big old knot. And then from here, you're just going to ladder stitch, which is just out on one side of that seam allowance, that fold that you made, then go the other side, and at the exact same place on the opposite side, you're going to want to do the same thing, and you're going to try and keep it consistent. So on this side, I'm going to go in and out, and then on this side, I'm going to see where I came out, and I'm going to match that on the other side. And I'm going to go in down the other side and go a little ways and come out. So if you don't pull it tight right away, you'll be able to see you're building little rungs of a ladder, and they should be perpendicular to your seam. So your seam is going this way. You should have little rungs going across as you sew. I'll see if I can hold this up to the camera in a second once I get a couple more rungs on my ladder. And you don't have to pull it tight right away, because the beauty of this stitch is it's one thread going back and forth. So when you pull on it at a later point, it'll tighten up all the way back down. So we're going to try and see if you can focus, camera. No, it's not going to focus. All right, well, come on. Will you focus? No? All right. You'll just have to trust me. You'll see it. You'll see it. I believe in you. So you can kind of give it a little tug. Watch it zip right up. And we're just going to do that all the way to the corner. At this point, I should have some music, but they have so many ways of catching you just enjoying music that you don't want to get this video taken down. So you have to listen to me talk about what I did with this fabric. So this fabric I used as a lining for a very fun jumpsuit, a gardening jumpsuit actually. So more like an overall, coverall type dealio. And it was from a costume pattern, and it has flowers on it. It had really pretty like purple flowers and little bees. I think they're bees. Or maybe that's just the yellow part of the flower. But that's what this fabric was from. So I only got a little bit of it because it's only to line the hood and make some bias tape out of. But I love it so much that I didn't want it to just disappear and just live in that one project. So here it is. It will live on with all my projects now. And I think this is a nice little way to keep good fabric that has sentimental value in your life, but keep it useful, because we're all trying to simplify and Marie Kondo our lives. So let this bring you joy and also be functional. So as you get to the corner, just keep making sure that rice stays inside, or whatever else you're doing. If you have a lavender bush, it's nice to go grab some of that, dry it out, and throw it in there with the rice, and then it'll smell nice. If you're filling it with some roving or some other filler that is good with essential oils, you can always top them up with that. Keep them smelling nice forever. And I'm almost done here, so it should be a pretty quick little stitch. If you only went halfway and you're doing a 7-inch pyramid, that's half of a half, like 1.5 inches, 2 inches of hand sewing. So for me, who I do not necessarily enjoy hand sewing, I think it's not my thing. It's very tolerable. So when you get to the end, you can just do the same thing we did at the front, where you take 2 stitches in the same place, making sure on that second stitch to go through the loop before you pull it tight. And then we will bury the tails. And so I'll just do my little tie off here. 1, leave a loop. and go through my loop. Go through my loop twice, please. And then pull it tight. Voila. And then to bury the tails, you just stick the needle back in the fabric, keeping it in the seam allowances. Go back a little bit and try and come out the center of the seam some distance away. So I went in there and I came out over here, and that puts the tail on the inside. So you don't have to cut it really short right where you tied your knot. This gives it a little bit of a length, a little bit of a tail, but it's hidden. So that would have to work all its way out before it untied the knot. And then you can just trim that right off. Trim off any other tails that you have still on there. And there you have it. Beautiful, fun, won't roll off on you. And we ended just in time because someone is now mowing and my door is open. So there you have it. And now you have your own little pattern. You've been through it once with me, hopefully. And add tassels, change up the fabric, change up the size, whatever you like. Get yourself a little family of them so you can have your different sizes. Oh, guys, oh, that's a bit medium. Okay, there we go. And make your own little gift sets. Make them for your own studio. They're really cute, they're fun, they're easy to use, they work really great. And I like them. So hopefully you had a good time. Hopefully you like these too. Very easy, nice way to get into sewing or to just do a little fun project with some fabric you have laying around that you don't know what you're gonna do with. You can't get rid of that scrap and it's so tiny. Might be large enough for this. So give it a try and keep that fabric in your life. Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a good time. Hope you learned something, maybe a new technique, but check back on the Facebook page for new events like this, and check out our YouTube page. It's PFI TV. You can search that up. You'll find us. Subscribe to that, and you'll never miss another one of these. So thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.